Hi, and welcome to another episode of Starship Gaming. Before we get started, don't forget to like and subscribe and hit the bell if you want notifications of when we make more awesome videos. Now on to today's subject. We are going to talk about the Sony PlayStation 1. More specifically, we are going to talk about how it truly was the beginning of modern console shovelware. So first, before we discuss, this whole thing about PlayStation, what is shovelware? Well, shovelware is just a bunch of software that's just kind of thrown out there on the market for the purpose of making money. I guess you could say shovelware kind of originated from the Atari 2600 era. Like you had all these Atari 2600 games just being pushed out on the market. So technically you could consider it shovelware. Modern shovelware really began in the late 80s, early 90s with PCs. Like there was all kinds of software coming out that really didn't have a purpose. I mean, it had a purpose, but it was just there to make money. So that was the beginning of it. But for consoles, there really wasn't any shovelware at that time. Everything was well regulated. Like, for example, Nintendo was real tight on what they would release. Yeah, there was some crappy games, and there was a lot of them churned out, but none of them would really be considered shovelware. Same goes for Sega Genesis, Super Nintendo, etc. But then you get to the era that's PlayStation. For the first, we're going to say the first 5 years after the PS1 came out, there was very little shovelware. I mean, yeah, some existed, but let's just say this. Very few existed up until about 2000. I think the first bit of shovelware that I started noticing was probably around 2000. It might have been 1999, 2000. I started noticing that there was an increasing amount of it. Here's the thing. The bulk of shovelware that came out for PS1 came out between 2000 and 2003. Like you had some games, like puzzle games that they were just churning out, just cheap ones. Let me give you an example of one. Pipe Dreams 3D. I believe it came out in like 2001, 2002. That's considered shovelware. It was just thrown out on the market. It's not really a good game. It's actually if somebody likes a game like that, yeah, but in terms of an entire game based around that, the whole concept, it doesn't really fit well. Of course, these were called budget titles. That's how you get around the term shovelware, budget titles. And you had stuff like card games. Like, I think there's just a PS1 game just called Card Games. That was a piece of shovelware. And then, of course, you had your sports shovelware, like some of them were just called baseball. Or you had one that was just called boxing. I actually have a sealed copy of just boxing. That's all it's called. I think that's what it's just called. And that was pretty much shovelware. There was a few select companies that just kept churning these out. Actually, it's kickboxing, not boxing. I had that wrong. I had to go back and check. But Age Tech was the developer of that, and technically that was shovelware. The interesting thing about shovelware is that a majority of it comes out near the end of life of a console. Mostly like within the last 3 to 5 years of a console, that's when a chunk of it comes out. Because they know they can get it to the market, people are going to buy it, etc. And you have in some cases, or it used to be, not in today's modern market, but it used to be that you could produce this software cheap throw it out there for like $19.99, $29.99, and this was before downloads. Now with the world of downloads, if you want to get a cheap shovelware game, you know, you just go and download it, and there you have it. But I was looking through my collection, and I actually have quite a few shovelware games. The term also for that is shelf fillers. They fill in the spaces on your shelf. Of course, shelf fillers are hardly ever played, if they do get played. The interesting thing is, shovelware, some of it is actually pretty good. Like, there is a, I think it's like table air hockey or something. I forget what it's called. It might just be called air hockey or something. And it is a piece of shovelware. I'm pretty sure it was, done fairly cheap. But the interesting thing about it is, it's actually not a bad game. Like, it's actually enjoyable. And it's one of the few that I've found that was enjoyable. Now, there are a few cases, I shouldn't say a few cases, there's a majority of cases, where you have one that looks like it's going to be good, but then it turns out to be really crappy. There's a couple, like, shovelware, like Mario Kart clones. I forget what one of them is exactly. I believe it got both a European and an American release. But it was like animals on something. I think in the United States it's called ATV racing or something. I'm not sure exactly, but it looked kind of awesome from the box art, or I should say the case art. But then when you actually play it, the controls are terrible. When you go around every curve, you almost nearly run into a wall every single time. Just a terribly designed game, and you could tell that this game was rushed to the market, probably made in less than 6 months, and just rushed out on the market. So, I mean, there was quite a few like that. Of course, shovelware really started becoming prominent on the PS2 and the Nintendo Wii. On the PS2, you started noticing a lot of shovelware coming out. The PS2 launched in 2000. You started noticing shovelware as early as 2003. And it just, just really crappy titles just being pumped out. And that's why there's so many games in both the PS1 and the PS2 library, because probably about 40% of it was shovelware. Now for the Nintendo Wii, oh lord, there was quite a bit of shovelware. I'm going to say probably, well, as sad as it sounds, about 75% of the Wii library was probably composed of shovelware. And then the rest was actual good first party and third party games. And the rest of it was just third-party shovelware that, just didn't make any sense. Like, for example, Chicken Shooter. That game was showing up for years with the little plastic, their version of the knockoff Wii gun, and the game in a paper sleeve. Was showing up in Family Dollar stores in the United States for at least 7 or 8 years after its release. It languished on the shelves, and somebody bought it. I actually did buy it. I got it for a good deal, $20 back in like 2011, 2010 or 2011, somewhere around that time. But I actually did buy Chicken Shooter, and it is a terrible game. It's a good time waster for like 15-20 minutes, but after that you just never want to pick it up again and play it. So the Wii had a lot of that, and like I said, 75% of it, and that kind of carried over into the Wii U also. The Wii U had a pretty large shovelware library when you really sit down and think about it. So the PS1 was truly the beginning of modern console shovelware. It really had a lot of games that nobody really wanted to play. There was a bargain bin for them. Somebody bought them. Of course, games, you know, when you really think about it, games during that era were still, I mean, they were the same price. Most of them were the same price as they are today, $59.99. Very rarely you'd have one that would go $69.99, $79.99, beyond that. I mean, you did have places that sold them more than $69.99. I mean, I've looked at some old ads, and some of those games for PS1 went like, you know, like how cartridges went. So they were making bank. And when you really think about it, when you sit down and think about it, shovelware makes sense because people want cheap games, you know, $20, $30. And of course, a lot of the shovelware, and forgive all the grandmas out there, a lot of them got into the hands of kids because of grandmothers and grandfathers. They said, Jimmy's got a PlayStation, let's buy him this. This looks fun, and it's Pipe Dreams 3D. Or, you know, which I'm going to talk about that, I think, in a future episode. If you think I should talk about that, let me know in the comments down below. It won't be a very long video, but nevertheless, I'll talk about it. I think that's one game that I actually dislike because it just, it annoys me for whatever reason. So, let me know what you think. Do you think that the PS1 was the beginning of modern shovelware? Why or why not? Let me know in the comments down below. So, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Hit the bell if you want notifications of when we make more awesome videos. And until next time, I will see ya.